Here is the first video in how to prevent overages with the Bentley Systems series of products. The first thing that we're going to do is to format our USB flash drive in the NTFS file system. I'm actually using an external USB hard drive, but the process is the same. The very next step is to start our virtualization software. Here I'm using VMware Workstation version 10, I believe. We're going to create a new virtual machine and follow the wizard for the next few steps. I always typically choose to install the operating system later. This gives me the freedom to have all the settings the way I want them in the hardware settings area before the operating system gets installed. Here we're going to select which operating system we're using. Please note that if you want to use a 64-bit operating system, your VMware Workstation or other virtualization software must support it or be that version. You choose the version that you want to install in the drop-down window. This example will be running Windows 7 Ultimate 32-bit. Now the virtual machine name here is different than the computer name within Windows. The virtual machine name is just something that the VMware will be saved as, the virtual machine will be saved as, and it will be a handy way to reference your users to launch that virtual machine. Make sure you change the default location to your newly formatted USB drive. Once the virtual machine has been created, this is the main window that you'll see when your users use VMware Workstation. The little play button is what turns the machine on and off. Make sure your install disk for Windows or whatever operating system you plan on using is inserted, and also make sure that under the edit virtual machine settings, the appropriate DVD drive is selected. It's pretty quick when it boots up. You need to be able to click inside of the window to activate your mouse and keystrokes to be sent to the virtual machine. You'll notice that it says F2 to enter setup. This would be a typical BIOS type setup, although you will notice it is a proprietary VMware BIOS. F12 for network boot, which we will not be using, and then in the escape button for the boot menu, I hit the escape button so I can choose CD-ROM drive to begin the installation of Windows. And Windows will load and set up just like any other typical Windows installation. All of the files will reside locally on the USB drive. Anything that gets installed will automatically get installed on the USB drive. When configuring Windows, make sure that the machine name and the IP address that you're going to assign to it, or domain for that matter, is all unique. For example, if you have 3 licenses, you may name the computer names as MicroStation 1, MicroStation 2, MicroStation 3. All Bentley Select Server looks for is the DNS host name of a client and the IP address. So by utilizing the same host name and static IP addresses on these USB drives, it doesn't matter how many computers the USB drive gets plugged into. As long as it's being run on a virtual machine, Bentley Select Server only thinks it is being run from a single location. This is no different than if you had a dedicated computer or server running the Bentley software that your users would then remote desktop into or do simultaneous remote sessions. I would also take this time to typically go ahead and install the users in Active Directory if you are using a domain and domain controller. In our particular application, our domain controller, Active Directory listing, and Bentley Select local Bentley Select server are all hosted on the same server. This makes it very easy for us to administrate it, and I have 3 users assigned: MicroStation 1, MicroStation 2, and MicroStation 3 that correspond with the 3 different license keys. This setup works fairly well, and if you're using a high-end USB 3.0 flash drive, it will most likely outperform any of the mechanical drives that your users are currently using anyway. The fast flash drives also work very well in USB 2.0 ports. Now you would generally set up the PC like you would any other user's workstation, with all the same settings, same software, etc. that you have licenses for. There is one thing that we need to do before you join it to a domain or assign it a static IP address, and that is modify the network adapter from network address translation to bridged mode. This is important to do so the VMware seems to be coming from a different piece of hardware instead of the network card that's associated with another host name and IP address. Once that is done, you may then join the domain and set static IP and any other networking components that you need to. That's the process in a nutshell. It's fairly straightforward, and it will prevent all your overages as long as you do not have the software installed locally on anyone's machine and force them to use these USB drives. Another great benefit is the fact that you can make easy and small backups of these drives, which makes them very easily to replace should something happen to one. You will notice, going from user to user, certain dialogues, especially if you're using VMware, that may or may not pop up. The default options for these seem to work very well, and we've had no issues with the Bentley Systems products using the default dialogues that may pop up. When installing the Bentley software, whether it's MicroStation or another one of their products, you go through the same process as you would on any of the user's machine and put in the site activation keys and everything else like you normally would, and you should be good to go.